So we've made it to week 8 of my series Journey to Marvel's Infinity War, and that means today we're talking about Thor: The Dark World. If you're new to this series, basically every week in 2018 leading up to Avengers Infinity War, I'm re-reviewing one movie in the MCU in release order, and it's been an absolute blast. You can check out the playlist right up here of the previous movies in this series that I've already re-reviewed, and then all the future ones will appear in that playlist as they come out. The way this works is basically I give a little background on the movie, I give a spoilers review, I talk about the MCU Connections, and then I share some of you guys' takes on the movies using the Stardust app. But before I get started, go ahead and tell me down below in the comment section, what did you think about Thor: The Dark World? This one is one that not a lot of people love, so maybe you're the one that does love this one. I'd love to get some lively discussion of somebody defending it, some people hating it, all that fun stuff. I'd love to get a lively discussion going. With that said, let's go ahead and get started talking about the background on this one. There's not a whole lot to discuss because by now the MCU is kind of in full swing. They were working out their plan, and so with kind of each new movie, it was just a little bit about who are we going to get to write it and who are we going to get to direct it. And that's where this one gets really interesting because originally they had hired Patty Jenkins to direct Thor: The Dark World. Patty Jenkins, who would go on later to direct Wonder Woman, who's gotten wild acclaim for what she did with Wonder Woman, she was hired to direct Thor: The Dark World. And given that Thor: The Dark World is kind of viewed as a mediocre, lesser movie in the MCU, and Wonder Woman is beloved by a ton of people, there's a lot of speculation about would her movie have been better? What would she have done with Thor 2 that they didn't get with the director that they did? Later on, during the press tours for Wonder Woman, she did actually put out some quotes where she gave her take on what happened, why she didn't direct it, and what she wanted to do with the movie. This is what she had to say. I don't think I could have made a good movie out of Thor 2 because I wasn't the right director. And I don't think I would have been in the running for Wonder Woman as a result. And that's one of the reasons why I'm glad I didn't do it, because I could have made a great Thor movie if I could have done the story I was wanting to do. But I don't think I was the right person to make a great Thor movie out of the story they wanted to do. I pitched them that I wanted to do Romeo and Juliet. I wanted Jane to be stuck on Earth and Thor to be stuck where he is. And Thor to be forbidden to come and save Jane because Earth doesn't matter. And then by coming to save her, they ended up discovering that Micallef is hiding the dark energy inside the Earth because he knows that Odin doesn't care about Earth. And so he's using Odin's disinterest in Earth to trick him. And so I was like, I wanted it to be a grand movie based on Romeo and Juliet, a war between the gods and the Earthlings, and Thor saves the day and ends up saving the Earth. When she passed on the film, they hired Alan Taylor to direct the film. He'd previously worked on a lot of television, specifically some beloved episodes of Game of Thrones. So that's a little background on the movie. With that said, let's go ahead and start talking about the movie itself, talking about the good. The best thing about this movie for me is that we just love to see these actors playing these characters. Of course, you got Chris Hemsworth playing Thor, another one of these MCU castings where you just think, who would be better at this? How could they get someone better? Because of course he has the look, the physicality for the part. He can do the bravado, being the arrogant son of Odin, who's a god of sorts, the defender of the realms, who's learning humility throughout these movies. He can play the fish out of water humor. He's got great chemistry with most of the people in the movie. Then of course Tom Hiddleston as Loki, is the slimy brother that is evil but not fully evil and values things, but it's his own unique thing. And he does just that slimy, you never know who he is so well. Anthony Hopkins as Odin is one of those castings that there's not a lot of actors that are better than Anthony Hopkins. There's not a lot of actors that would have the age and look to play an Odin, and the accent, the voice, all that fun stuff. He has the full package, so just amazing casting in that. Having Rene Russo show up as Thor's mom. Like all these just castings, we love to see them in these roles. Natalie Portman is a great actress. There's debate as to how good she is in the MCU, but you can't debate whether she's really good as an actress, and so it's nice to see her. Stellan Skarsgård is, of course, one of these guys that's one of those nice character actors in the movie that just kind of fleshes things out as the sides. He gets to have a little bit of fun in this one, running around naked all over the place through half the movie. So a bunch of fun things like that. Then we have like Chris O'Dowd showing up as the, more of a bit part in the movie as the date for Jane Foster early in the movie, and then shows up a little bit later in the film. He's just so pleasant. I love that guy. That guy needs a lot more work. I want to see him in a lot more things. So just right off the bat, there's a lot of actors playing characters that we like to see on the screen. Some of them have great chemistry together. So that's the next thing to talk about. Thor and Loki have great on-screen chemistry. Now, the way the movie's structured, we'll talk about this in a little bit, they don't really get on screen together until halfway through the movie, and as soon as they're on screen together, bickering back and forth, it's like the energy of the movie just picks up because they're so good going back and forth because you got two amazing actors with parts that they're just made to play, and sparks fly when they're doing that. And so just the movie comes alive. As soon as they're go on that rescue mission together, things get exciting. It's also nice to see the realms of the MCU as we go out into space, and at the beginning where you've kind of got this Lord of the Rings vibe going on as you see kind of the history of the MCU, and you're seeing Odin's father in what his dealings with these dark elves, and then the transitions from there to Thor rescuing these different realms and planets and stuff with rock monsters. It just makes the world bigger as these sorts of things happen, and there's a whole history to it where everything's coming from that makes it feel lived in and gives a backstory to everything that we're seeing. It doesn't just feel like a cardboard cutout, just a movie standard. Like, no, all of this has a backstory to it that ties together. That it's very comic booky in that sense of you feel how big all of it is. And the Thor movies, maybe only on par with maybe even more so than the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, the Thor movies give the biggest picture of the MCU because it's so interstellar in nature while going to Earth. And you have a lot of time on Earth, a lot of time with the history, the backstory. So these kind of give the best picture of how big this universe is. And it's nice to have a Marvel movie where a character dies and stays dead. In the case of Frigga, Thor's mom, she actually dies and stays that way, which the MCU doesn't have the best track record with it. Even this movie doesn't have the best track record with characters staying dead. But it's nice that happens. Actual stakes, consequences. Not everybody can just, ta-da, they're back. With that said, let's move on to the mixed aspects of this movie. And the big thing here is the tone on this movie is all over the place. Just all over the place. So it starts off super duper Lord of the Rings in space. I mean, it gives this backstory that's straight out of a Lord of the Rings movie, except it's in space with the father of Odin and these different, even talking about elves and stuff like that. And then it transitions to Thor on an adventure, so it kind of continues this high fantasy adventure in space. And then we cut to Natalie Portman on a date with a guy, and it's awkward and they don't know how to relate, and so it's like a rom-com out of something. And that's what the first movie did a little bit, but it fit the themes of that movie in that you have him going from the grandeur of Asgard down to small town New Mexico to humble him. So that fit the themes, that there was a shift, and it should have felt different to go to this big world to fish out of water comedy. Here, it just felt like an odd transition. Like, what are we doing? Because we're not doing the fish out of water comedy this one, so I'm not quite sure what we're doing. And then there's this whole stuff where there's an intern running around with Kat Denning, and so just quirky comedy with that didn't feel like it worked. As the movie goes along, it just kind of goes into real serious at times because you're killing off Frigga, and right after that happens, right after we have an actual character die, the mom dies, we free Loki, and it switches to a buddy comedy. And they got great chemistry. It's funny, but it's just such a sharp transition, and very suddenly, what are we doing now? And it's so jokey out of nowhere. And there'd been jokes in the first half, but as soon as it's Thor and Loki, it's just joke constantly. Like Thor Ragnarok speed of jokes as soon as Loki shows up in the movie, and then as soon as Loki is killed off, then that ends. And so the tone just shifts radically. And the reason I even put this in, the shifting of the tones is the bad, but sometimes that's really good. Like, it works when it's funny. And each of the specific tones, I was like, this kind of works in and of itself. So when you've got this Middle Earth sort of backstory thing going on at the beginning, it's cool because you're going, oh man, we're seeing this whole world. This is pretty cool. And then when it's funny, it worked pretty well when it was Thor and Loki. But because it's jumping around, it's a very mixed, odd thing to have happen that makes it difficult to connect with the movie. As I was watching it, talking about it with my wife, that's kind of what we kept talking about. I was like, some of this is funny, but it doesn't, because of what just came before this line doesn't feel right. It's falling flat, not because the line's not funny, not because Chris Hemsworth can't deliver these lines, not because Natalie Portman can't deliver these lines, but because it's so jarring, the shifting of the tone of it, that it makes things fall flat when they shouldn't fall flat. From there, let's move on to the bad. The big problem here is this is the most forgettable villain in the MCU. I can't even ever remember his name. Dark Elf Malekith. Dark Elf Malekith. I mean, I couldn't tell you anything about him. I can tell you a little bit about his scheme to wanting the ether to turn the universe dark, which in of itself, the plot is also one of the most forgettable of the MCU, if not the most forgettable. But you don't know anything about him. You don't understand his motivations. You don't care about his motivations. He's just the Dark Elf that's evil, that wants to do evil things. Therefore, he's responsible for killing Thor's mom. We don't want that. He's responsible for sending big ship things to Earth, and we don't want that to happen. He attacked Asgard. We don't want that to happen. He might have killed Loki. We don't want that to happen. But we don't know anything about him. We don't care anything about it. Like, I don't remember any lines. I watched the movie 3-4 days ago. There's no, like, lines that he said. There weren't any memorable scenes with him. There's just nothing about him that pops that's memorable. And somewhat because he seems so distant and forgettable and lacking in interest that it makes the main plot just kind of there. And it tells us at the beginning, there's the ether and the dark elf were banished and Odin's father, and we can't get rid of it, so we sent it off somewhere. Like, it tells us all this stuff, but none of it's interesting enough that we know what we're supposed to care about, what momentum is driving things forward. So weird stuff starts happening on Earth, and we're like, what's going on here? And then there's an attack happens, but it just sounds disjointed. And like I said, I've seen this movie 3 times. So this is the 3rd time I've watched it. I watched it in theaters. I watched it about a year ago. No, actually, I didn't watch it in the theater. That's not true. This is the only MCU movie I didn't see in the theater. So I saw it when it came out on Blu-ray at first. Then I saw it about a year ago, and then I watched it 3-4 days ago. And every time I'm watching it, I'm like, this plot is just so not interesting. It doesn't pull you in at all, and it's so unclear what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. And when you have a villain you don't care about and a plot you don't care about, it makes the movie seem pretty distant. That's what makes this movie so difficult to rate. It's not that there's a bunch of scenes that are horrible. There's not like cringeworthy moments. It's not like a disjointed mess, kind of like Iron Man 2. There's nothing that makes me mad about this movie. It just falls kind of flat. It's just kind of mediocre. It's just kind of forgettable. Overall, I would rate this one a B-, because it's not a bad movie. And because it's part of the MCU, the amazing cast here, there's still enjoyment to be had here. But when you're comparing it to the rest of the MCU, it's mediocre. Mediocre MCU to me is still quite enjoyable. But however, on an entertainment level, I would only go a 6 out of 10 on this one because it is pretty mediocre. It's still quite a bit of enjoyment there. It's not totally boring or anything like that. There's enjoyment to be had, people I enjoy seeing on screen. But on an entertainment level, this is probably the least entertaining of the MCU movies for me. With that said, let's start talking about our MCU connections. Right off the bat on this one, we kick things off with Loki is in prison after the events of Thor. Excuse me, actually it is after the events of Thor, but after the events of Thor as well as the Avengers, he's in captivity on Asgard, and throughout this movie, as Thor had said he was going to do in the previous movies, he's trying to create stability within the mini-realms, so he's on a whole bunch of adventures trying to create peace and stop the chaos that's happening with their star portal thing being destroyed in the original Thor movie. So that's what he's been out doing, and that means he hasn't gone to go see his girlfriend Jane, which highlights kind of one of the problems with these movies is the relationship between the two of them, because all they've really had is a weekend romance in the first movie that lasted 2 days. And by the time you get to this movie, they haven't seen each other since then, so they still have only spent 2 days together. But anyway, that's I guess I should have mentioned that earlier in the video. So that's pretty important. All the stuff about the Dark Elves doesn't really have a lot of MCU connections, but it builds the universe. It gives us the concept of the age, all these creatures, beings out there that have been out there for a long time. As we go through the movie, the story, generally speaking, is pretty standalone, but some events happen that matter in future movies. Thor's mother dies. Pretty important because she doesn't come back in Thor Ragnarok. Odin is replaced by, or Loki is fake killed. Typical MCU doesn't like to kill many people off, so we only get one death in this movie. So Loki is theoretically killed, and we learn at the end of the movie he's replaced Odin. This doesn't seem to have big ramifications within the MCU, but it does play out into the beginning of Thor Ragnarok. That's pretty important major plot line as where's Odin at, and then we see where he's at in that movie. The biggest and most important MCU connections with this one actually come in a post-credits scene that was directed by James Gunn because it involves the Collector. So we got our characters show up at the Collector, and essentially what they say is we've already holding the Tesseract in Asgard, and we don't want to have two Infinity Stones in the same location. So they show up with the Collector, they hand him the ether and say, hey, we need you to take care of this. Will you keep this safe because we can't have them together? Do you understand the importance of this? Oh, I totally understand the importance of this. And then he says,
one down, 5 to go.
Alluding to him wanting all of these stones for a specific gauntlet for a specific character, I'm assuming, or for himself. Some sort of schemes in that the whole idea of someone is trying to collect all of the Infinity Stones because they really want to take on the universe. Just, I saw this shirt at the shirt store where I buy my quirky shirts, and I was like, that is a shirt I have to have. And it ties in nicely into a whole bunch of these MCU videos I'm shooting these days. Anyway, those are the MCU connections I saw. I'm not sure, did I miss any? The big ones are those Infinity Stones and where they end up with the Collector and where a couple of them are at. That seems to be the most important thing for me. So that's my take on the movie. Those are some connections. Here's what some of you guys had to say over on the Stardust app about Thor the Dark World.
Well, Thor the Dark World, it was okay. It had its moments, but the villain was kind of weak. It could have been a whole lot more better, along with Thor and Jane's relationship.
Exactly. Those are really the two things that kind of make this movie probably fall the most flat, because it's about Thor trying to stop that bad guy and the relationship between him and Jane. And if that relationship falls flat and this villain isn't interesting, the movie falls flat. So not a bunch of things to hate about it, but the two most important relationships aren't very interesting.
My least favorite MCU movie? Thor the Dark World. There's nothing spectacular about this movie. It's often forgettable, it's very disappointing, there's a lot of humor in it that falls flat, and Malekith is the worst villain of the entire MCU. But Chris Hemsworth is still great as Thor, Tom Hiddleston's really great as Loki. There are some really good moments in this movie, but it's just overall a letdown.
Yep, that's it. I didn't even realize that as I was about to do this, that he was about to say a bunch of things that I just said in my review because they're just kind of true.
This movie is very mediocre at best. It's my second least favorite MCU movie.
But it's okay, it's watchable, just the worst in the MCU for me.
It's a good film, has a pretty weak villain. Probably one of the worst villains in the MCU, but...
Thor the Dark World, that's my least favorite movie of the whole MCU.
And I like the performances and the action sequences. It's just the villains were just there, I guess. I don't know.
If you can remember anything after you've watched it, good for you, because I can't. But from what I remember, Hemsworth's spying, but just looks like he wants comedy, which he eventually gets in Ragnarok. Woo woo! Hiddleston's pretty good, best thing about the film. Malekith is the worst villain ever. The plot's pretty dumb.
So there you have it. That was my take on the movie, some of you guys' take on the movie, and they line up pretty well on this one. Of the movies in the MCU, this seems to be the one with the most consistent evaluation from the internet. Also, if you want to appear in one of my future videos, it's real simple. All you have to do is download the Stardust app for your smartphone or your Apple, Android, either one of them, at that link down below. It's an app that basically makes it so you can record 30-second reactions to movies and TV shows right there on your phone and post them straight onto this app. There's a whole community of people that watch them, review them, other people's stuff. So it's a ton of fun. And if you want to appear in one of my videos, all you have to do, follow me, download it at that link, follow me first. And then when you review a movie, tag me in it. So it shows up in my little notifications deal. When you record a reaction up in the right-hand corner, there's a little place where you can add people's names and tag them. Tag me in it. It'll show up in my feed, so I will see your pretty face, hear your voice, and know your kind of take on stuff. Obviously, I'm going through the whole MCU, so there's the ones that are pretty obvious that are going to be coming up. Any sort of rankings of major franchises, you can pretty predict when I'm going to do those ones. I like to include you guys' thoughts. So there you have it, my take on Thor the Dark World, your take on Thor the Dark World, and how you can appear in a future video. And if you're new to my channel, channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos. The key thing is I don't want to just talk about movies, I want to talk about movies with you. So join me down in the comment section. Give me your take on Thor the Dark World. Download that Stardust app so I can see you over on Stardust. And as always, thank you for watching.